STRs don't do quite as well and MTRs do about as well, and I think the revenues are roughly the same. But in general, even with the decline of STR revenue in the last few years and the higher costs associated with an STR, I think you still make more with an STR.
I think it depends. I think if you self-manage an STR, you're definitely going to make more money on the STR, especially if you're close to a geographic area that's really attractive, or if you're downtown and there's a lot going on. At STR property management, and they're actually good, they're going to cost you a lot of money. Yeah. How much does an STR property manager cost? Hello guys, my name is Erin Spradlin. This is my channel. It covers all things midterm rentals and how to self-property manage, because I happen to believe that in the midterm and long-term space, it is an easy enough thing to do, and the sooner you can learn how to do it, the better. Today, James, my business partner, my husband, the person that I fight with the most when I set up a tent, is joining me today, and we are gonna have a little debate over which model is better, short-term rentals or midterm rentals. James, do you want to say anything about yourself before you lose this debate?
I hope we fight a lot less on this than we do about the tent. That's what I think. Yeah, I'm James Carlson. I am a real estate agent here in Colorado focusing on short-term rentals, STR investors, second home buyers. I also do expert witness work for court cases that involve construction litigation, usually preparing reports for people that want to know what their potential lost revenue was. I do a lot of other expert witness stuff. I do that all across the country. I'm licensed to do real estate here in Colorado.
How much money have you won someone in court? So in our household, we play a little game when you come over where you just get bombarded with this game where you have to pull something out of a box and then you have to answer the question or debate the topic.
This is STR versus MTR, right?
And so we're going to do this here. Okay, money.
I think you still make more as an STR, but that depends. There are some locations where STRs don't do quite as well and MTRs do about as well, and I think the revenues are roughly the same. But in general, even with the decline of STR revenue in the last few years and the higher costs associated with an STR, I think you still make more with an STR.
I think if you self-manage an STR, you're definitely going to make more money on the STR, especially if you're close to a geographic area that's really attractive, or if you're downtown and there's a lot going on. The problem with it is that while the money is really good, if you get STR property management and they're actually good, they're going to cost you a lot of money. Yeah. How much does an STR property manager cost?
25 to 30%.
Yeah, right.
Of gross revenue.
And a ski town could cost you as much as 50%,
yep.
Right?
Yep.
So you lose a lot of money with STRs on the property management side. Vacancy is also an issue. So that's part of the reason why midterm rentals came about, is that people would have a lot of success on their STRs through the summertime, and then the hard months would hit, like November or December. And when those months hit, it really didn't make sense to be swapping people in and out for the amount of work and the amount of money that you got versus a midterm rental. It made more sense to do a midterm rental. So on that note, I think a midterm rental is for people that want to make more money than a long-term unfurnished rental, but they don't want to do all the work that's associated with an STR. And to James's point, some areas are going to do better than others. Like, I think having a huge house in a rural area with nothing going on is not going to be a good midterm rental. So that is why midterm rentals are attractive. If you don't want to deal with the hassle all the time, you can have someone that pays that elevated rent, but you're not having to fuss with them every 4 days. It's more like fussing with them every month to 3 months, and sometimes you even get longer extensions than that.
Next topic. Work. I'm not even sure what this means. Oh, amount of work? Yeah, I think STRs are more work, duh. You have to set up cleaning way more often. You have to deal with questions day in and day out. Where's the Wi-Fi? Even if you posted it 15 different places all over the property, someone's going to email you or text you or call you at 11:30 at night and say, what's the Wi-Fi code? So it's definitely more work. I'd say communication with guests is a lot more cumbersome, and then just turnover and coordinating with cleaners and handymen who might need to fix things more often.
Because I think with a midterm rental, regardless of where they come in from, the first week or getting the tenant is going to be a lot of work to begin with. Just learning the platform, learning how to set it up, also answering their questions. This is all before they show up. And then after they show up, you also have to handle some communication with them. See a pattern, so it gets easier with each rental. But the first one is kind of tough and requires, if it requires work, it requires work for a short amount of time in the beginning, whereas STRs are always short. So you're basically repeating that loop all the time.
I will say there's a lot of really cool systems for the STRs that allow you to automate a lot of what you do. So you can get apps like Turnover B&B that allow you to sync your calendar with cleaners. So supposedly you don't have to communicate every time with your cleaner. There are ways to make it more automated, but you cannot automate out yourself. It's going to be more work.
Personal use.
I win this one. Have more flexibility with an STR to use it for your own personal use. So if that is part of your goal, like I get a lot of people who want to have a second home, but they also want to be able to rent it out, maybe make a little bit of money. So if you have those dual goals of personal use and investment, then the STR is the way to go, because you have a lot more openings between guests to go use it yourself.
That's what's true and not true, because like we have a rental in Denver, which was the first property that we ever owned, and it's now a midterm rental. And when we know that there's going to be a gap, sometimes we will leave that gap open for a little bit so that we can go and spend 3 weeks, 4 weeks in Denver and just have that experience. And so you could do that other places. Bigger issue for people using midterm rentals or having access to it is how much money do you want to make? Because you often are going to want to use it at the same time when you're going to make your most money off of booking it. And so that's sort of an issue. People think midterm rentals, they're only going to come in for a month or 3 months. Well, more and more we are seeing people come in for 5 months, 6 months. They want to extend. I have midterm rental with the idea that you're always going to have access to it, or that you're going to have access to it 3 times a year, because you might not. And that's actually a great problem to have.
Wear and tear.
This is interesting because people come in and they think that STRs have more wear and tear, and that's not true. A midterm rental tenant, especially one with kids, does more damage to your property because they use the appliances, they use the kitchen, they use that stuff all the time because they live there. Their experience is to live like a local. So when it gets returned to you, you definitely need to bake in at least 2 to 4 days for the turnover in case there's significant use. Whereas a short-term rental, you can hire a cheap cleaner to just come in, do the showers, do the kitchen really fast, etc., because there's only so much scuzz they can leave on the inside of a refrigerator in 4 days.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of how often you have access to the property. And if you take this to the logical extreme, a long-term rental, you're never in there, right? Somebody is in there for 12 months and they don't clean the baseboards, they don't clean the stove, they don't clean anything. The doorknob that breaks off for them, they just leave it. And so you never get to fix all that stuff. So by the time you come in, you've got a lot to do. Whereas a short-term rental, you're in there every 2 to 5 days and you're fixing stuff like that because you have to if you want to have a successful and profitable Airbnb. So yeah, it's not really even close in my opinion. But I think you can solve for that. I mean, I think you maybe disagree about this.
I know where you're going, and I don't like this one bit.
You can have a cleaner come in to an MTR. You could pay for it, and you would get access to that property. You would see what's going on in there, and you would address the issues before they become bigger issues.
Well, how are you going to address that issue? You're going to say, my cleaner came in and spied on you, and I disagree with the way you live your life. Like, they can treat your property however they want. Yes, I have a question about, like, if your cleaner goes in and you don't like the way it's been treated, what is the plan for that? But my bigger issue with cleaners is that I'm an adult. I'm a clean person. You can tell me all day that cleaner is free to me, but if you mandate it, there's no way for me to not believe that cost is being passed on to me, and I don't like that. I don't need a cleaner. My other issue with a cleaner is that if something walks off, if there is an issue, and we don't know whose fault it was, well, now responsibility is diffused. Was it the cleaner that did it? Was it my husband that did it? Was it me that did it? Whereas if there's no cleaner in there, that's never a conversation.
I think that's fair, but I think it's, as with everything, there's no right or wrong answer. I think it's all a balancing act of your goals and your priorities, and I think if one of your concerns is that you think a medium-term rental will cause more damage to a property, which it doesn't cause a ton. I mean, we're talking about this as if someone's going to destroy a place. They're not, most likely. But if your concern is that they will cause more damage, then having a cleaner is an option. And yeah, you can write it in. You can set that expectation up front. You can tell the people that you're going to have this cleaner that it's at the landlord's expense, and that if they find any low key maintenance problems, we may try to fix them. You don't cast it as a comment on their lifestyle so much as wanting to help them live in a better place. That's what I think.
That's just not my feeling. If someone says you have to have a cleaner, I would say I'll rent somewhere else. The only time I would ever have a cleaner is if there are some red flags in the application. So if you see someone come in and they're not being totally consistent about their circumstances or their credit score, or just your gut feeling is telling you something, but you still really like them, then I might say, yeah, we'll rent to you, but we're going to have a cleaner come in every month. And the problem with this, though, is that a lot of people are not going to like that, and they're going to walk away from that deal, but you can't prove a negative. So you can't prove that they were going to bring in 3 cats that you never knew about, because they're not going to take the deal, because the cleaner is going to be there and they're going to get caught. But I think that's the only time I would do it, and I'd be very transparent with the tenant. You're an imperfect tenant. The credit score is below where we'd want it to be, but we really like you. We want to give you a chance, but this is how we're going to protect our interests and allow for you to rent the property.
Next.
Wait, this one says like and subscribe.
Oh, does it?
It does. It says like and subscribe if you're learning something or enjoying this. Is it my turn?
I think so.
Free will. We went on a backpacking trip and James asked people their feelings about free will. It was just crickets.
There was one of those.
People did not.
Dead. It was already dead. It was like it was almost meant as a joke, like animals.
Animals. Okay, so I'm totally pro animal in the midterm rental space. I think that there's more of an argument of not having animals in short-term rentals. So the number one reason to have animals in the midterm rental space is that you will knock out 50% of your competition in most geographies. So I've done a study of different metros, and it just seems anywhere between like 30 to 60, but 50% was the most common number of competition that you got rid of if you allowed for animals. The other issue with animals is that when you do a review of insurance claims versus what you can charge to allow animals, you come out way ahead if you allow for animals, and there just aren't that many insurance claims on people bringing in animals. The final reason why you would have people I just made a really weird noise that I'm gonna edit out. Anyways, the final reason why you would have animals in a midterm rental is because you have to think about your tenant type, and your tenant type has the flexibility to travel, and they also have the money, which means they're probably a little bit further into their career, but they don't have kids yet, but there's a very good chance that they have fur babies, and they are not leaving those fur babies at home. So it just makes sense for your tenant pool to allow for animals.
I think you're totally right. I think a medium-term rental probably requires even more that you allow for pets if you really want to maximize your revenues. But that is not saying that it's not important for STRs. I think that if you want to cut out a lot of your competition in an STR, then you will also allow for pets. I mean, we travel with our dogs, and we make choices on where we stay based on who allows for dogs. So I agree with you in that we can travel without our dogs for 3 or 4 days, and I'm not going to move somewhere for 4 months without taking our dogs. So in that way, we have to take our dogs if we're going to go stay in a medium-term rental, and you don't necessarily need to in an STR, but man, if you really want to kick out a bunch of competition in the STR world, you also allow for pets. So
I think something else to highlight, if you're in a short-term rental and you're going to allow for pets, make one of the first lines in your description save money on kennel costs, whatever, because that definitely factors into the cost of vacation if you don't have someone to come watch your animals. And with this too, whether it's a midterm rental or a short-term rental, I would allow up to 2 dogs, because again, this pool of tenants tends to get 1 dog, dog and then they get another dog, which is what we have going on. And so it's much harder to find a dog sitter once you have 2 dogs. So if the rental allows for up to 2 pets, then you're even further ahead of most of your competition.
How many pets do you advise people to
I
allow?
max at it too.
Yeah. I think we've already covered this.
Wait, do it again. I don't care.
Maintenance.
Oh, maintenance. This is a big one in the midterm rental space because I think so many people that are reluctant to have a rental, especially a long-term or a midterm rental, there's like 2 or 3 core fears they have, but one of the core fears is that someone is going to call you at midnight and say there's a plumbing issue, blah, 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 blah. So the solution to this is to empower your tenants to take control of a situation, which is to put in the lease or in the Airbnb listing, you are responsible for managing all of the maintenance and I will pay you back. You can take it out of your rent. I can pay you through Zelle or Venmo the next day, or you can have them call me. The other thing is we have owned property since 2017. We work with investors. I have never heard of a story of someone having to wake up at midnight for a plumbing issue, which isn't to say that there aren't issues, but 99% of the issues can wait until Monday. They can wait until daylight hours. And if they can't, you probably want to know about it. But also, I don't like doing the back and forth, the telephone with my tenants. So I just say, you take care of it and we'll reimburse you. And despite what people think, tenants definitely have better things to do than to make up issues and run up the price on you.
Yeah, and that's definitely not the case with STRs. People are going to call you and expect you to come fix the issue. They don't. There's no issue too small for them to call and ask you to do it. So you win that one.
I've won
Way to
all
go.
of
No,
them.
you haven't.
I've won all of them.
No.
Okay.
All right. What do you got? Regulation.
Okay, regulation. MTR wins again because if there's any kind of regulation on the city level, with the exception of Baltimore, everywhere else is a 30+ day minimum. And maybe there are some other cities, but I'm just saying as a general rule, I call cities all the time and get their regulations, figure out what their limitations are, and 30 days, just like a standard long-term rental. And I encourage you to think about the midterm rentals as just a furnished long-term rental, because that's essentially what it is. If your city gets regulation, midterm rentals are going to allow for it. The other thing I want to say about that is that if you have an HOA, you need to check your HOA docs, because that does come up. A lot of HOAs have a 6-month limitation, a 90-day limitation. So even if you're clear through your city, you might have that limitation on your HOA level.
Yes, STRs are much harder. So in Colorado, where I work all the time, the map is shrinking of the certain areas where you can do short-term rentals. So I think that's probably why a lot of people turn to you, because the regulations have shifted, and so they want to turn to a medium-term rental. You're saying Baltimore has a what is their rule?
90 days.
You cannot rent for less than 90 days.
Yep.
Wow.
Maryland has really interesting laws around deposits, and Baltimore has the 90 days. I guess I'm inclined to think that Baltimore might be trying to fight a different issue by having that 90-day limitation, but I am strictly speculating.
I wonder how do they have any kind of cutout for corporate housing, or, I mean, how do they? That's interesting. Huh,
Yeah,
I didn't know that. Final one. What is this?
Do you want to ask it? I think I asked the last one.
I do, yeah.
And it's really special if you get to ask it.
It just says squatters' rights. I win this one. This is kind of a BS topic anyway, because this is everyone's worst nightmare that doesn't really exist. I feel like people just are so paranoid about it's the number one concern that people have about getting a rental, becoming an investor, is that someone's going to come in and sign a 1-month lease and then stay there forever and ever, and that you can't do anything about it, which is just really not how the law works.
How does the law work?
Well, I don't know how it works everywhere, but here in Colorado, they actually just passed a pretty strict law that does away with something called no-fault evictions, and that has got people all up in arms. It makes people think that you can totally squat, but really all it means is that you can't kick people out for absolutely no reason. So if you just get to the end of their lease and you don't like them anymore and you want to kick them out, you can't do that. There has to be a violation of the lease. What it doesn't do is allow people to just stay forever. There's still something called a lease. It's a legal document, and both sides have to abide by the terms that you find in it. And so if they are violating the lease by not paying it, by not keeping your property in good condition, XYZ, whatever terms are in your lease, as long as they're legal to have in your lease, if they're not abiding by those terms, then you can kick them out.
I'm starting to study a lot of squatters' laws across the U.S. because the people that watch this channel and a lot of my clients are concerned about squatter laws, because once you hit that 30+ day threshold, then are you vulnerable to them? And I'm going to do a series about different states and their squatter laws, which might be worth subscribing for, just throwing that out there. But a pattern or a couple patterns that you see throughout all the U.S. states, including California and New York, where we think of them as being really, pro-tenant, is that the squatter has to live there for 3 years or more continuously without disruption and without anyone knowing about it. So I don't know about you, but I'm definitely checking in on my properties more than once every 3 years. So that right away would take away the problem. Second thing is that they have to do it openly. So the neighbors have to be aware of them. They have to know. They can't be hiding out. If they're hiding out, then that also disrupts it. And then finally, if they have signed any kind of lease with you or anything, that squatting wouldn't start until that lease is up. So if you've signed like a 2-year lease with them and then just didn't bother to check your place for 3 years, then they would be okay. But it's not like they can be there for 2 years or 2.5 years and then they're there for 6 months and it happens. If there's any kind of agreement between the two of you, that completely obliterates the squatter's rights for that property. And then there's all sorts of other things. Like in some states, they have to pay the taxes. It cannot be forced or hostile. So it's not like you can, intimidate the landlord and then you're allowed to be there. If someone else lives there, so let's say you brought someone in to live in a room and they've been living in that room for a long time and you're also in the property, then they don't have squatter's rights. So I think squatter's rights, it's much more difficult to acquire a property through adverse possession, which is squatters' rights. And I think if it wasn't, we would hear about squatters more. And for those of you that live in California, New York, New Jersey, that are really worried about this, and you've heard about someone, I would encourage you to try and lock down that story, because I guess I'm starting to think it's more of like an urban myth than the reality.
I 100% agree. I am not a hater of the media. I used to be a journalist forever and ever. I think that for the most part, they do a pretty good job, by the way. I do think that those extreme examples sell, and that's, some weird loophole, some weird outlier of an event is what you probably read about. But if you follow your rules, you set up parameters for how you're going to rent out a place. You get a lease that you work with Erin on to get a really strong lease for your particular state. You have them sign it. You get the deposit. You do all the things that you're supposed to do. You are most likely not going to run into any problems.
Totally. I mean, and I'm with James on the media. I think that they have an important job and they're doing the best that they can. But this always comes up with tenants, where people have all this fear around tenants. And it's because that's an interesting story. When someone comes in and lets 3 cats urinate all over your property and doesn't bother to clean it up for 6 months, that is a more interesting experience than a good tenant. And so that's why we hear about it all the time.
Did you enjoy this more or less than trying to put up a tent together?
I enjoyed it more.
Did you?
What about you?
I enjoy so many things in my life more than putting up a tent together. We get in so many fights about that. This was a really positive experience.
That's good.
Well, if people are still concerned about any of these issues, should they consult with you?
So if you're new to landlording and you're a little bit intimidated by it, that is the point of this package, is to help guide you through your first tenant and show you it is easy, but also get you set up with your best practices, your best marketing, and all the back end settings depending on the platform that you pick. If you have experience with landlording, but you're new to midterm rentals, then the 1 hour or 2 hour package might be more appropriate.
I listened to a lot of your calls, and it's this interesting mix of very, very practical tips on how to set up your MTR, but it's also kind of therapy a little bit. Sometimes
Because it's scary.
people get scared about doing this and taking that step when maybe all of their friends or their family or their neighbors are like, oh, don't do that. I've heard about bad stories out there. And
So who do you think won?